Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life.
So welcome, everyone. Today is so exciting. We are starting our Table and Compass podcast here on Big Blend Radio. We invite you to pull up a chair because the conversations we have here are going to shape and change our future for the better. It's about how communities, partnerships, and sustainable development can create a better future for people and the planet. And that includes those of us who are travelers, which I know a lot of us that are connected here on Big Blend Radio, whether it's our experts or our audience, we love to travel. As many of you know, I'm Lisa Smith, co-owner, producer, and host of Big Blend Radio and co-publisher of Big Blend magazines, along with my mom, Nancy Reed. We've lived in different countries around the world, mostly in Africa, Mexico, England, and also we travel full time across the United States. Here at Big Blend, we talk a lot about our virtual house of content. This is our new Big Blend Media House. Go to bigblendmediahouse.com. And as we say, every good house has a table. And it doesn't matter where that table comes from. It could be the fancy polished one, or it could be one from Goodwill. This is where the best conversations happen. But then how do we move forward from that conversation? Well, we got to point our compass. And that's exactly what Table and Compass is all about. We're excited to launch this new show with two people who have become not just colleagues, but true friends and collaborators in the work that we do here at Big Blend. You may know Joelle Machia and Ryan Slough from Wanderers Compass at their blog, and also their podcast here on Big Blend Radio that airs every second Monday. Now, Joelle, during the beginning of Wanderers Compass podcast, she turned out to serve as United Nations representative to ECOSOC and has spoken at the UN General Assembly on sustainable tourism. And through Wonders Compass, she and Ryan have visited more than 60 countries. I believe it's 500 plus castles right now.
Actually, I think we're at 67 countries and 507 castles.
Also, a gazillion UNESCO World Heritage Sites and communities all over the world. But through all of our conversations, we kept going, especially after Joelle talked at the United Nations General Assembly. Ryan did a thesis on what's happening to our water in the world. And then the Fortuna Awards, it just became a thing of we got to do more than our travel podcasts together. And what if we took these conversations deeper and talk about how to make it better? So that's how Table and Compass was born. And so this is a partnership between us all. So we're excited to bring you into our little kitchen, sit at our table, have these conversations, and also look at solutions and bringing people on this show that have not only worked in making things better, but also have solutions and examples to follow. So our first episode, I'm going to bring Joelle and Ryan on in a second, but we're very excited because we have Carlisle Richardson back on the show. He was on our show back in 2015 and was on multiple shows talking about the UN because he's also deeply entwined with the United Nations. But he joined us with his book, Island Journeys, The Impact of the Island Way of Life at Home and Abroad. So we're going to talk about that and bring him on in a second. And he's got a new book out, Soft Underbelly. But we're going to talk about some of the sustainable development goals with the United Nations. But first, I'm going to bring Joelle Machia on because, Joelle, you're the one who stood up and spoke. But give everybody a little overview of why you're doing this show with us and your background on even being connected with the UN.
Yes. Hi, Lisa. Thank you. This is such a pleasure, and we can't begin to express our excitement about this show and also where it can take us and the messages we hopefully will learn from these incredible guests we will have as we launch this new thing. So through Wanderers Compass, Ryan and I have spent years exploring the world, meeting people, learning from communities, facing both incredible opportunities and many significant challenges. I actually spoke at the United Nations side event during the General Assembly at an event that was dealing with water and sanitation and these incredible efforts being made. Because when you learn about the importance of water, it is core to survival to this whole planet, not only for the people, but the planet itself. And that day, Ryan was there as well. We were really moved by the power of that. At the time, I was just invited as speaker, but later on, the opportunity came up to actually become a United Nations representative to ECOSOC, which began in January of this year. That work has really reinforced what we've witnessed during travels, whether we're talking about sustainable tourism, education, cultural preservation, which is so important to us, economic development, or conservation. All these issues are deeply connected. They're connected to all of us. And even for those who don't travel, you are connected, even if you're not able to go out and do it. Table and Compass brings, I think, those conversations to a table in a way that is accessible, focused on solutions, but most importantly, hopeful.
I love that. The hope is there. That's important. We got to bring Ryan Slough on, also a veteran for our military here in the Army. So, welcome back, Ryan. Tell us about your part of this and why the UN and these conversations are important.
Well, as you know, I've recently just graduated with my bachelor's and started my master's degree in college. But last year, one of my classes, I had a long paper to write about certain topics, trying to take in different theories. And that was right about the time that Joelle joined the UN, and she started learning about these sustainable goals. And I was trying to pick a topic of what I wanted to write about. And I was like, well, I guess obviously now I should write something about travel. I think I got a little more knowledge, but we had to do a big paper on like a problem and how to solve it. And so I eventually talking with her, she's like, well, why don't you do a paper on the sustainable goals, which I then basically incorporated many sections of some of the different goals into my paper. And it is basically about how to solve the problem of sustainable tourism and how do we, you know, get in a mindset of practice what we preach and respecting, not only the environments and the communities, but cultures and everything else, because with how much travel industry affects so many around the world and which connects us, and learning more from her, now starting to participate more. And then here we are with you. We come up with this idea to start sort of bringing conversations like this together to do our kind of little part to get a little conversation going of what we can do as individuals or even our small communities to make things better.
Yeah, I think it incorporates us as travelers. What is our footprint at home and what is our footprint when we travel? It's very important because a lot of places also shun travel because they don't want Disneyland in their backyard, which I understand.
Mm, yeah.
And so when we talk about tourism and travel, the community has to be involved. And that's why we're doing this show. It's about the table, sitting down, the compass, where you're going to go. So I'm really excited to bring Carlisle Richardson back on the show. Like I said, he was back on the show in 2015, I believe. And that was with his book, Island Journeys, The Impact of the Island Way of Life at Home and Abroad. But, Carlisle at that time, I believe, was also ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to the United Nations as an economic affairs officer. So welcome back, Carlisle. How are you? It's so good to have you back. It's been a while, and you've done a couple other shows with us too. So welcome back.
I have, I have. Hi, Lisa. It's an absolute joy being back, and it's great meeting you, Joelle and Ryan.
It's so good.
Thank you so much for being here. We could not have picked a better first guest.
I know. I was like, as soon as we talked about this, I'm like, I gotta find Carlisle.
She did.
Whatever it's
You
called.
definitely did.
I,
Yeah,
I was like, it was the first thing because I remember you coming on and talking, and I was like, and then you did a show with us with Les McCabe and Global Green and our late dear friend Adam Roberts, who has since passed, who is doing so much in wildlife conservation. But you know, you you're from the islands, and I think you
yes.
you really, I'm going to say from the first day on, made such an impact on us all talking about the importance of the islands. And every time I talk to anybody from any island now, I'm like, oh, we need to like shine a big light on you because whatever we do anywhere, it affects the smaller islands, right? And that's what you taught us at the beginning.
Well, that warms my heart. That really warms my heart because that's what we want. The islands. The former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, referred to the islands as canaries in the coal mine with respect to climate change and sustainability. And what he was referencing is the fact that what affects the islands, will eventually impact the entire world. And so the islands were that marker, that beacon of look at what's happening there. Let's protect the islands, because in protecting the islands, it really ensures that everyone else, is going to be okay. Sustainability will flourish. And so it's such a great thing to hear that, the islands have continued to be highlighted. At the beginning, just I love the name Table and Compass. And I love it because, someone told me once, and I've since appropriated it, that the UN is like a table. And it's the table where all of the countries are welcome to come sit and resolve their issues, learn from each other, develop partnerships. And that that table, you know, cannot change the world, but that table will allow countries and persons to actually help to bring about that change. So the table and compass, I think, is such a great idea and a great name to have.
Well, I thank you for that. And Carlisle, the compass part, I think, is where we want to go and now have a plan. So, how do we go from the table to the compass and actually into action? Because, I always say, Joan Baez said this, it's one of my favorite quotes of all time is action is the antidote to despair. And when we look around the world, there are so many terrible things happening and war affects people. I mean, when we look at the UN and the Sustainable Development Goals, I want to explain those on the show today. These are some really cool concepts and goals that we can adopt into our communities and as we travel and everywhere. Meetings at the table are great, but don't you think the compass has to happen and we need to kind of have I almost feel like we should have a lighter at the end of the compass so that actually happens. How
Yeah,
do we go forward?
yeah. Well, we definitely need a compass. I think, the idea of the table and the idea of the UN is we need to have that forum for people to actually have a conversation. We need to begin with the conversation. And if we don't start the conversation, then we will not learn from each other. So we begin there. But yes, we definitely need that compass. We need to implement the ideas that are presented at the UN. And I think that has been one of the major challenges. How do we get this implementation going? And for me, I think a podcast like yours is one way of getting that implementation going, because this is where we continue that conversation, but also reach a wider audience. The UN tends to focus on, governments, it persons who are plugged into the UN way. But how do we ensure that the rest of the world, the wider international community, persons in the islands, persons in landlocked countries, persons all over understand these ideals. And this is how we do that. So for me, I think that, we need it hand in hand, but we definitely need more persons knowing about what can be done. The Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm so pleased that you're discussing this, and Joel, that you've engaged on that, because the SDGs are a blueprint. They are that blueprint of this is what we need to do. And, we always focus on the 17 goals, but there are 169 targets. And so
Well,
that's where the implementation kicks in. How do we ensure that we can, reach these targets? Because if we reach these targets, then there we go, we're implementing it. And so there's always, that focus on the goals. But yes, there are 169 targets. And I think that's what we need to focus on. Ryan, can I and this is, I think, a perfect segue. You mentioned your paper on water and on SDG 6 on clean water and sanitation. And of course, I know you guys are involved in sustainable tourism. So many years ago, there was a hotel that wanted to develop in St. Kitts, and they wanted to build on this former agricultural land. And, it made sense from a tourism point of view, because it was, perfect location, great view. Except what they didn't realize is that this was actually the water source for, like 50% of the population. And, so they did up all their blueprints and everything. And then the water department said, hold on, no, you can't touch that area. And to the credit of the hotel, they're like, we didn't know, we'll move, to another point. And so that hotel is there now. And it's a great source of employment, of contributing to the GDP, but the water source has remained. It's remained clean, and so ensuring that the population and the tourists who are staying at that hotel are well, looked after. So it's a great indication of how when we implement the ideas behind, the sustainable development goals, you know, um, we work hand in hand. And so we have economic development, we have tourism, and we have, the water source, good water and sanitation still continuing. So that's, one of the targets that was met in that instance.
That's great. Yeah.
I'm going to ask Ryan, have you seen any places in your travels, you and Joelle, that have been conscious of water?
Yeah. So most of what we've noticed it at are island places. And I know we saw it in Turkey. They were very conscious on water conservation. Like just our recent trip in St. Martin, we could see people, one, investing in their water system to get it better. Because I know one of the things, the one side has the water desalination plant, but then they have like the gray water distribution system. So when you wash your dishes and little things like that, the water goes out and they water their lawns. So they're not wasting anything, kind of thing. And I remember Greece, some areas like Santorini and other places, even in Europe and UK, you were going to these airports and they have like these really nice water bottle Phillips stations now. They don't have the old water fountains anymore. But they have these nice, so you can, remember to, hey, bring an empty, it doesn't even have to be a water bottle. It could just be, an old water bottle, like from a used bottle of water. It doesn't have to be a nice container, and bring it with you empty. And then boom, you can fill up, and that's one less, thing that you're wasting. So I do see it a lot more and more. And I think, even though us being in the U.S., think we don't need those things, but I think we do, because it's kind of like, like in anything else, we set examples, and when one person isn't following through, especially, like that bigger brother, the older sibling or whatever it is, or that rock star, hero or whoever it may be that just someone might look up to or feed off of. And if they don't have the right attitude, and if they're not doing the right thing, other people are like, well, why should I? And some people, in places can't afford that. So like they have to do it, like these small island nations or these African nations, these desert places, but they can only do so much because they have it a lot harder, not only financially, but just the weather, the climate, and everything. So if you don't have that mentality and you're not spreading that mentality, then you have people that may preach one thing, but then they get over there and do they practice what they preach? Are they actually using a water bottle and refilling? Are they doing, as we say in the Army, like combat showers, where it's like you turn the water on, you get wet, turn it off, you soap up, you turn it on, you rinse off, things like that. But I mean, that's a little more extreme, but are you just taking like a quick shower, or are you just sitting in there for a half an hour at this place, just burning up all the water, that this town needs? When you set that example, like anything, it spreads. Like a good deed spreads, the ideas spread, so I think there's a lot of people that are doing the right thing. There's a lot of countries I see that are doing the right thing and helping out, and in the UN doing their part, trying to spread this. And I think there's a lot more to do, and for people to start really paying attention and get on board.
Mm, well said. I agree with you. I think it is about, leadership by example, right? Keeping on the water theme, I wanted to ask Joelle if there was any places that you can show a good example of what they're doing with water in your travels as well.
Recently, we're seeing again this recycling of water. We saw that quite a bit in actually and in Anguilla, even these very high-end hotels, they're really making an incredible effort to keep this water reused because it is an issue, especially on the island of St. Martin. They just don't have they have no rivers on St. Martin. So, of course, you don't have any fresh water. It's all got to be recycled from the ocean. So, there's incredible efforts in relation to that, Ryan. I just got back from visiting 5 countries in Europe, and it's everywhere now. We're seeing it in all hotels. What we're seeing is also that they don't even have water bottles. They'll give you a container, and there's a central area where you can fill your bottle. Really, you're seeing this quite a bit, but where I've been most impressed was working with this group within the United Nations that we were speaking at and I've had some meetings with since. They're really working at, again, especially in the African nations and the island nations. Water is a big issue. When you have stories of children having to walk hours a day just to bring enough water back to get through the day and not be able to go to school and so forth. And the efforts, again, there is something bigger on the global scale, but we also can make massive differences in small communities. And hearing some of these stories of just be able to get into a small community, dig a well, and give them access to water is life changing. It could change every aspect of these families, these children's lives, and give them a promise a future and a chance for health and so forth. And then, of course, you got the sanitation of it. But hearing more and more of these stories with my work with the UN, it's incredibly inspiring. Sometimes it's hard to get countries to work, but you can make a difference in the smaller communities. And in the process, by you handling these issues, you can maybe bring tourism in there. You can bring economic growth in there and jobs and so forth. It all ties together. But if you don't even have basic water access and safety issues in relation to that or sanitation, that just sort of kills the ability to have tourism and other maybe potentially businesses in there that will help develop economic growth. And with Carlisle, I'm so impressed when I was reading about your background. And, oh my gosh. I'm curious, what experiences, because you've had this amazing background, if you want to talk a little bit about it, that would be great. But what experiences most influenced your path and shaped your perspective on the challenges and opportunities that are facing the world today, which obviously is tied to these SDGs we're talking about today?
So you mentioned Anguilla, Joelle.
Yes.
My parents are originally from Anguilla. And so, in fact, much of my childhood was spent every summer holidays, spent in Anguilla. Now, when they moved to St. Kitts, they built a cistern, and the cistern basically to collect water, rainwater, and the purpose really was to water the garden. So something as simple as that, just collecting this water so that we're not using it from anywhere else. And that was the source of our garden water for many years. And so growing up, I understood, this idea of preservation. I also like to tell people about, I would have been 9, I think, when my primary school went outside and, planted a tree. And we planted this tree on April 22nd. Now, at the time, I had no idea why this was significant, but, I learned later this is, Earth Day. When I worked in the UN, being a part of this team now that is actually coming up with these policies that would go back and influence, children, in different countries around the world who were influenced just like I was when I was 9. So, these little aspects in my childhood sort of framed my thinking around sustainability. At university, I was in Barbados when the first conference on small island developing states occurred. And it really helped to frame my thinking about, all right, well, why are these issues important? The first thing was that here was this global organization, the UN, that was addressing our issues. You know, um, whether it was climate change, whether it was oceans, whether it was food security, and it really had that impact on me that I wanted to be a part of that environment. Helping to bring about these positive, actions. Uh, and it's never easy trying to convince persons who have, who've not followed these practices throughout their lives. But you know what? That conference in Barbados at the UN told me was that we just have to keep telling that story, keep telling the story, keep encouraging and showing from best practices rather than dictating to anyone, but it's showing this is what we're doing. And you're correct. Communities, it starts with the communities. The UN tends to focus on the international, but it doesn't work if the communities are not plugged into that. And I think in everywhere that I've been, I've engaged with communities and with young persons because it starts with the youth. If you get an opportunity, you should go to the World Food Forum at the FAO in Rome because they're focused on engaging with young people. What are they thinking about sustainability, about food security, about water and sanitation? And it's such a beautiful conversation that's taking place because we're hearing from 18-year-olds, this is what we think we should do. And so an 80-year-old is listening to an 18-year-old who's telling them these are some great practices that we have. But then the 18-year-old is also listening to this 80-year-old and learning, oh, is this what you did when you were my age? So it's a great community of like-mindeds that's gradually spreading. And I think that's the way to get that message out there and to get more and more people to be involved in sustainability.
I think it's also the individuals. And I think that's also part of what Table and Compass, this podcast, is about is, you talk about the community. It can be global, but it really is, like you said, this community that happens. And I have a dear friend, Henry Biernacki, author and world traveler. He had I think 6 or 7 countries left on his list, but sadly passed away just over a year ago from malaria. He was also a pilot and, he did all these things, but as he traveled, he went to every country. He went to, every place. And he contracted malaria in the Congo, and thought he could just run it out of his system, because he'd had dengue fever right before he met Mother Teresa kind of person. But while he traveled, his whole thing was he always said, it's not the monuments, it's the people are my monuments. And he really was like that, you know. He was on many, many, many of our podcasts, and he went out and met people, talked with them, and we kept telling him, you haven't been anywhere until you've gone to Africa. Like really. Nancy and I, we would just, mess with him and say, you think you're a world traveler, but until you go to the continent of the motherland, you ain't seen nothing yet. And finally he went. And he'd done a lot of Mexico. In fact, he started traveling when he was 17, got on a bus, went down there and fell in love with travel and
Yeah.
people and those experiences and learning languages like he did. And he went to Africa finally and
Okay.
fell in love again, just like Mexico with the people. And he started, just like in Mexico, funding girls to be able to go to school. Now, this is the difference. We think about funding kids going to school around the world that are underprivileged and don't have that. Well, here's the difference. He funds, well, in his foundation now that he's passed the STEP I'll put the link in the episode notes. The STEP Foundation, all his book sales go to it, and his mom is running this foundation that's amazing because they fund girls in Africa, not just for the school. It's about, do you have food? Do you have shoes? Do you have a uniform? Because if you don't have all that, you aren't going to school and you're not going to make it. So it's
Exactly.
about going backwards to go forwards, right? And I thought he got it when he was there, And that's this thing. We always do this as we jump in society. It was like, put it to the schools for the kids. But if they don't in Africa, you have to have a uniform. You have to have do you have transportation to school? No, most of them are walking miles, and I've done it personally, as Carlisle, you may recall from past conversations, but it
Yeah.
it is not easy to go to school in Africa. School is a privilege. It is a sought after thing. If you don't feed, water, and clothe, it's not gonna you're
Not
not
gonna
gonna go
work.
to school.
They won't go to school. Yeah. And you're so correct. And I mean, there's so much to to speak about what you just said. But yes, we need to begin with the basic necessities, because yes, we all look and say, well, all right, why are you not, going to university? Well, first, you need to be fed. You need to have shelter. You need to have a home. You need to be safe from fear. You need to be able to get to school. So there are all of these little things that I think we take for granted, but there's so many who don't have. And so it's always, just so inspiring to hear about people who have realized that and have, you know, are helping to ensure that they have these basic necessities. But you're so correct. Travel is about meeting people. It really isn't about and yes, we love to see the monuments and the sites and all of that. But the people that's the real jewel in every country you go to. And for me, that's what I love about traveling, speaking to, the locals and learning their local culture. It's a joy. And I know eh, this is exactly what you guys do. You meet with people and that makes your journeys that much more fulfilling.
It is the people. It's what drives us. We just got this trip we just went on. We were able to bring Ryan's young son, and we're trying to pass that on to him. And that's what he learned very quickly. Simple things like saying hello in the language and so forth. People were so kind and engaging. And some of his favorite moments, he talks about where people he met, like this funny tour guide at a castle we were at. It's the connection of the people. When we were in Ireland, it was this man who spoke Gaelic and sung songs that he also gave us a tour of Limerick. His favorite moment of that trip, it's the people. They asked that, he loved the Eiffel Tower and things like that. But in the end, it seems to be those moments that gave him the biggest smiles were the connections. And that's the case. We've always, Ryan, I felt always so privileged that people we've met along our travels and continue to meet. And they are just, and the connections we continue to have long after we've been there. We're going back to Italy soon, and wrote to somebody who's we're going to known for many years now, who we met during our travels, and looking forward to reconnecting. So it is those people, and when we have those conversations, we all can make a difference and learn about how we're so similar, and then also that whole aspect of respecting each other's community, where they're from, who they are, and realizing as much as we have differences, we are very much the same in so many ways.
And I know, Carlisle, you've written children's books too about this. But I'm going to go to Ryan because, Joel is talking about your son and everybody you're going to hear next Monday the podcast. And they're here every second Monday. You'll hear about Ryan and Joel taking Ryan's son around Europe. But Ryan, in the experiences, and I want to go to Carlisle with his book, for kids too. There's this balance of like, we feel the pressure of climate change and all these things and wars and all of that. And I know that, your son has been to castles and forts and seen where wars have happened. Do you see him, even though he's really young, kind of, what's that like to understand, like he meets the fun people, but then understand, does he get that context of like, I met this fun guy at this castle who took us around, but like, wow, his ancestry had some brutal times. And is that like a thing traveling that there's that lesson instilled? And is that something that you have to stay on top of so it's not forgotten? Like when you travel, about meeting the people, seeing the good and the ugly history?
Yeah, I kind of make it a point. Well, I don't make it a point to just like, oh, I'm gonna tell them all these things. It's just there, like there's so much history, and especially places when you're going to places like castles or churches or whatever these things are. I mean, you're gonna learn, right off the bat of like some bad leader, some bad fight, a clash between this people and that people because they didn't like, whether it was this religion, that religion, this country, that country, one king versus another king. But I kind of, since I'm traveling with him, it's like I oddly feel like I'm a teacher sometimes because I'm just constantly pointing the things out. But then as soon as he's looking at something, I'll like start talking about what it is, or he might ask me a question and then I start explaining things, and I don't really shy away with it. Like I said, before with, he was looking at that and I'm like, hey, well, you know what that is? He's like, oh, is that where a torture device? I was like, oh no, that's guillotine, and he asked me what it was and what it was for, and I told him because we were in Luxembourg, I think at the time, but then, I started telling him about, the Versailles thing and, the uprising and all that stuff. And that's just like, history that's written down and we know, but, you know, when I'm traveling and other things I still talk to him about real things that are going on as well, like, just little things. He's been very conscious and about trash and stuff, we used to all the time when I was little, he'd make me pick up, a piece of trash on the playground, walk around. And I'm like, yeah, or he'd be like, I'll be back. And he just starts walking away. I'm like, picks up, a piece of trash and goes, throws it away. And, he's like very responsible, I guess, that way. And it's so cute. But, I try to tell him like, well, that's good because of X, Y, Z. A lot of times, like, if there's certain things that, like, we order food, I don't want to waste, I'm like, well, we're not going to order this. We're going to want to waste it. Or, hey, you need to save this for later. And I'll say something. I'm like, well, because there's people that don't get this, and it's kind of, it's kind of points him in a mindset, points his mindset into something that there's other things out there. So he should be grateful for what he has, but also don't waste, because everything we waste affects other places too. Because if I didn't waste it, if I used it, or I just didn't, order it or whatever, that's less, resources being taken, and everything else. So I try to, little ways, little things, keep him, bring up what's the reality of the world that we're in now, and what's happening. He's very aware about the political situations right now in our country and around the world. And he's like, why? And I'm like, well, who knows, bud? But I try to keep him informed of it and be like, hey, there's more to the world than just us. And obviously, it's clear that what I do or what our country does or what some other country does affects others and all of us, whether, you look at prices of things or the loss of jobs or, the destruction of, forests or, resources or something like that. So,
Mm,
gotta,
yeah.
bring him up. It's a little more smart now. So he's you always tell him, I'm like, you're like, I want him to be better than what I am, and the only way to do that is through teaching, and there's no better teacher than life and the travel to have that immersive in-person education.
I love that. I think that's part of, we talk about these SDGs and we'll be talking about them for years on this show. But I think it does go down to the very basics of community. And here's some problems out there in the world and in our community. And what can we do around the table? What can we do? How do we point the compass? And Carlisle, isn't that part of even why you wrote a children's book, right? To kind of help that, because it is really difficult right now. So I know we want to get into some of these SDGs, but truly, it's a warm up here for folks to even know that those exist. So, but when we talk about community, community is also within the home and within the family. And how do we talk to our kids about these kinds of things going on in the world? Because they know stuff's going on. They're born with phones in their palms right now, So the
Yeah.
books, and does that help, and the community help with that?
Most definitely. I gave a talk. My son, he is 9 now, and I gave a talk to his class. I think it was 2 weeks ago, because they're doing biodiversity, and so the teacher was like, "Oh, well, you worked on sustainable development. Come and give a talk." And so I was like, "Okay, sure." I'm thinking, all right, and this probably was the most difficult preparation I had, because how do I break down all of these issues so that a 9-year-old would understand? And it's much harder than speaking to like-minded. So for me, the first shock was how much they knew, and and I'm thinking I definitely did not know all of this stuff when I was 9. But, I was talking about, climate change and disasters. And I didn't want to show, any of the images of like what happens after a hurricane or a tornado or, storm. And the teacher was like, no, 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 show them that image. It's fine. They can handle it. And I realized that yes, we can tell them about all of these, Ryan, you speak about, these histories. But we could also, tell them about these realities, the destruction in tandem to community development, because they can handle it. You're right. They are, they're all plugged in, so they're much more aware of what's happening than we are. But yes, so for me, that my children's book, I wrote that during the pandemic. Melbourne, we had the unfortunate title of being, the world's most lockdown city. We were locked down for quite a long
This is
time. And
Melbourne, Australia, everybody. Just
yes,
put it in
Melbourne,
context.
Australia.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes. And, and so during that period, we were like, all right, what do we do to keep these children entertained? Because they're doing, home learning, which is not fun for a 7 and a 5-year-old. But they, so my wife was like, let's continue with the gardening. And so we, they did up this garden in the back, and like, what do you want to grow, kids? And so it was, great, activity for them. They're learning about gardening, and they were actually, they'd go and give, the neighbors, the different produce. They had that much. And so I looked at that and I found an instant connection to my own childhood in St. Kitts when, in the afternoons I'd go into the back into the back garden with my parents and garden as well. And so, true gardening, there was that connection between my parents and my children. And so I felt like I need to write a book about this. And so, so Rose Grows Veggies is this children's picture book that, speaks about the joys of gardening, but also about making new friends, the importance of community and sustainable urban development. And
Mm.
so, just bringing all of these sustainability issues together just so that children can understand these ideals very early and incorporate them into their lives. So no way trying to dictate what they think, but just showing them this is one way. So we have, this is how you make friends, because all of the children on the block in this book, coming, oh, what are you growing? Well, I like carrots. I'm gonna go and get some carrots and I'll garden with you. And so at the end of it, this little girl who had moved to this new neighborhood, she's made friends with all of the children on the street. They're having a street party at the end of it. And so I'm showing all of these images from the Caribbean, playing cricket and having a barbecue. And you guys were just in St. Martin, so a little carnival scene. So it's really touching on this beautiful idea of sustainability, for children, because I think it's important that we understand that that's where it begins, community, and the simple things. So, yes, definitely helping to get those messages out there.
Well, I would go to Joelle. Joelle, because oh, you guys did Mardi Gras,
Yes, we
Carnival,
did.
I should say.
Carnival.
Yeah, Carnival, and yeah, it's so funny. You guys were in Saint Martin, and we were in Avoyelles Parish, Louisiana, which is French with Creole, Cajun, and we were having similar experiences
Yes, we were.
across the world. Isn't that amazing? And I think that's something I want to say. United Nations is that we really are united if we choose to be and choose to work with this. And I think Joelle, as a parent and also a lady who comes from a career in healthcare, as you know, nursing and oncology nursing and all that you've done in that and all the world travels, do you think that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're not here to play, classroom or, do you know your goal today? That's not what it's about on this show, as you can tell. But do you think that we do need to actually start with the kids in a way with this too? It can't just be adults in meetings where everyone's arguing, which they are, something has to happen where we have these discussions with kids. It can't be hidden. Like what Ryan was saying, it's like he's not gonna like hide it from, his son, because that's not gonna be good. You know what I mean? It's like it's too easy for kids to find out, and they're so smart compared. Like, I mean, I don't know. My generation, we were smart too, but like they're born with YouTube already.
Yeah.
They're-
And I think that's
yeah.
so important is sharing early, because we are working a long time with in pediatric oncology, you learn quickly that these kids understand a lot more than people believe. And we sometimes underestimate their capabilities and understanding. And in the process, disrespect them in some ways, because we just, well, they can't handle that. Oh, we shouldn't talk about it. They're hearing it, they're seeing it, they are plugged in. But we don't take the time to talk to, or too many people don't take the time to talk to them, to give them that respect, to have that conversation. And with Ryan's son, I think it's so cool that he wants to have that conversation. He's seeking it, as opposed to, well, you're too young for that. Or the world is there. They're hearing it. They're seeing it just from conversations of hearing adults having. So let them be part of it. Give them the credibility and the respect they deserve to be part of it if they want to. And I think talking about things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are important. I mean, they're, as I think Carlisle said beautifully, they're a blueprint, but they're a blueprint for peace, for prosperity, for sustainability. It goes way beyond just the goals. This is a global issue that we need to cross everyone, whether you're a highly successful industrial nation or someone who is struggling to even feed your people. We're all connected and we need to work together. And I think this idea of sustainability has to cross all those levels, because what these very wealthy industrial nations do does trickle down to people who are struggling. We need to really work on that. And I really like the way the goals do that. And I think we could translate them into everyday life. It's about economic development, cultural preservation, community well-being. And all that ties into these goals. When I first learned about them, and mostly through Ryan, because it was like I had heard about them during my time at UN, but I was like, you should maybe do a paper on it. And then when you did the paper, I learned the depth of these. And really, in our conversation today, I think there's just several of the 17. And I recommend everyone, because we're not here to teach you about the goals
We'll
per
put a
month.
link in the episode notes for
Yes,
everybody
you
for
could
the
go right to the
17.
UN. You just
Yeah.
Google Sustainable Goals UN, and boom, you have this really great visuals that teach you about all this, because there is a lot there, and you realize how it benefits all of us. So I think you easily could learn about this, but it really is about a partnership, working together, trying to get all this work done so we could all connect and help each other, not only, people, but climate change and so many other aspects. And as we learn about this, we grow as people. And in children, what's something I was recently at the UN, there was this youth day where they brought all these young people, and most of them looked their teens, I would say late teens, 16 to 18, future leaders. They were training them, teaching them about the importance of the United Nations and the little things that can happen as well as the big things. And that's exactly the point. Get these young people in the conversations early, because they're our future. If we don't engage them early, and we hope, later in life they'll figure their way. If we engage them early, we can make such a difference. And what we saw in that group was from all over the world. They weren't just from New York or from the United States. This group of young people were very diverse and very engaged already. And that's where and they probably started that conversation when they were much younger, to care, to make a difference. And I think Carlisle's book is an excellent example of that, teaching these children how it's all connected and how you make friends and you connect with other people. So we definitely need to engage our children, treat them with respect, and realize they're capable and they know a lot more than many people give them credit for.
Mm. So when we look at all of this of getting to the table, I was raised in Africa where there was a village, and in traveling the country full time now in the United States, there are villages in certain places, but I think now, and maybe it was just my era in Africa, like my time frame, the village was like you couldn't get away with anything. We really thought we did. We skipped school, but the parents picked us up on the other end and said, "We know you're out, man. We know where you're walking." We got caught with everything, but they also appreciated because they knew we were using our brains to get through something. But this is the point. It was a village. Everybody looked after each other. And I feel like maybe I don't know if it was just a thing of living in Africa, because I don't know, because I wasn't here in the States or England. Well, I was in England, but it was maybe this era of like we had more air travel. Then everything started being like we wanted things faster. And then this country, the States, for me, has always been like, whoa, what the heck, what, drive-throughs and things like that. Now Africa's like that, Mexico's like that, everywhere is kind of like that. So I don't know if how we're moving things forward so fast has been that disconnect of the village. And I kind of feel like the SDGs, the goals, are about community. And, like I said in the beginning, this is about community, everyone getting together around the table, and it's looking at your local community. I think that's really where we have a stronger point of making change, is through our local communities, and even just our neighborhoods. Even our neighborhoods, I know about neighborhoods where we're great, and then all of a sudden here comes crazy stuff happening, whether it's okay, that's a whole other conversation on another show. But Carlisle, what do you think about that? Where, here's the UN, it's just this big global thing. Everyone argues, like on the political side, not the people involved, but the goals are there. Who cares about the politics? Like that's what I said on the show. Just wanted to call out the elephant, and I
Yeah.
love elephants. But isn't this really about going back to, can we have a village even if part of our villages around the world? And that's what the UN is bringing the village together.
You're correct. Because I'll say, growing up, my childhood was just like yours. Growing up in Africa, that was mine in the Caribbean. I remember once, I was walking home from school, and I took a different, route to get home. I went through, you know, the city, walked past, looked in at a few shops, I was with my friends. By the time I got home, my parents knew everywhere that I had been. That's just the nature of these, these small islands. But I think, there was a period, maybe 10, 15 years ago, where all of that had changed. What's happening now, it's becoming a return to that original, ideal, because I think people have realized that, hold on, we've gone too far, very disconnected. The first time I moved to New York, for example, I was, you know, on my way to work, and I saw this lady outside. She was, raking her leaves, and I said, "Good morning," as I'm going past, because that's what we do in the Caribbean. And I'll never forget. She dropped her rake, spun around, looked at me. Why am I speaking to her? Yes, and so the next day I'm going, and she's raking the leaves again, and she stops and she looks at me as I'm going by. And I looked and I said, "Good morning" again. And, she's just staring at me this time. The third day, as I'm going, she looked at me and said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from the Caribbean. I'm from St. Kitts and Nevis." And she goes, "Okay, I'm from Jamaica, but I've been here so long." And so instantly, that Caribbeanness kicked
Wow.
in, and she realized that, oh yes, okay, that is what we do. And every time I would see her after that, she's like, "Oh, meet my grandchild," and we became best of friends. But there was that disconnect that she had lost once she had left. The UN is bringing basically all of these communities. So the communities in Africa, the communities in Latin America, the communities in the US, because the US has a lot of communities, maybe not in the big cities, but in so many places around the US, there is that community feel still. And so
Yes,
you
Nancy and
bring
I know that. We travel and stay in them.
so there you go. So we're bringing this to the UN. It's not about the the political statements that they come every September. They, say
Mhm.
things that may be divisive, may be, collaborative, but it's the people who are left there who now, because that UN is its own little village. We have to interact with each other on a daily basis. And so over time, it's not, "Oh, I'm from St. Kitts and Nevis and you're from Argentina." No, it's, all right, what do we have in common? How can we work these things out? And suddenly you're asking, "Oh, you eat You eat that as well. Yeah, we eat that. We do it this way. You start to learn about people, who they really are. And that is such an amazing connection. I was at a party once where, there was, he was an American delegate, and he is, they're playing African, I forget which country it was, Brenda Fassie, so South Africa, and he's
Yeah.
dancing with a young
Yeah.
lady from Cuba. And I looked at that and I thought, there you go. That's the UN. There are two individuals enjoying
Mhm.
great music. It's not, this political dynamic that tends to cloud who we are as humans. And so that's the UN. And I think it's our responsibility to help to, bring these ideals to the rest of the world. But they're there. And I think I will say from my travels, there are more people and there are more countries who are plugged into these ideals than there are not. We just hear
Mhm.
more about those who are not. They're in the news more often. And I think it's always a shock to the system, to the rest. But there are 193 member states of the UN. And I'd say that more than 150 are plugged into the Sustainable Development Goals. More than 150 are very much community minded. And so, we just have to keep growing with that. The first time environmental issues was brought up in the UN was in the 70s, and no one really took it on. But now it's the Paris Agreement is adopted, the Sustainable Development Goals are adopted. It's growing, and there are more people who are plugged into this. We spoke about the fact that there's so much water, and sanitation initiatives taking place in different countries. This would not have happened 30 years ago, but it's happening
Right.
now. So it is working, slower than we would like, but it is working. And I think that's what that's the positive we take with us and keep that momentum going.
It's like I was telling my friend's foundation is that the little tiny step. And that's what it takes, I think. It's not always some huge bill that takes 10 years to go through Congress. It's these little things in communities where we're holding hands across the borders, across oceans to make things work together. And I
And
think that
the impact on those communities we can never measure. And it carries beyond that. Who knows? Someone moves on from that community and does good and brings it to other communities. Yes, it's just small stuff. No, it's not small stuff. It's a building block to a greater overall picture. And I think that's frustrating. People dismiss it. Oh, well, it's just a community of just 100 people. But you change the lives of those 100 people. And then you could change the lives of another 100 people or 50 people. It's the little steps that get us into the big differences. And I think we need to embrace that. And I think Carlisle said that beautifully, as we need to move with that and realize, and to care. And part of it is caring and wanting to know the stories and not dismissing them and saying, we made a big impact on those people's lives. And it goes from there.
absolutely. Now, in closing, because y'all, we're having a good table conversation. Somebody needs to
Hit
put
it
up the
again.
second pot of tea. It is. It's like, when I grew up, every time there was a problem, you went in the kitchen and the table was always one of those worn down tables. It wasn't a fancy table. The kitchen table was the one where everything happened. You walked in the table, in the kitchen, and something was going on. It was like, put the kettle on. I don't know. It's just that's what the kettle was everything. Put the kettle on, you sat there, and when you left, you had an idea what you're going to do. You were on a better path. Let's put it this way.
We
And
did the same.
yeah, you did the same too. The kettle. The kettle was, man, and it's like the kettle. Everybody needs a kettle, y'all. Come on. I mean, we travel the country full time, and we, pet sit, and we're immersive, and that's the beautiful thing. And I feel like we feel like the UN every day because we're in these immersive experiences. And so I think if we could do that a little bit more, that's great. But in closing, and we didn't do every single goal or everything, but everybody, this podcast is going to go on for a long time. And we're just really, let's build the community first. But I want to say The UNESCO World Heritage Sites are so important. And when we talk about travel and when, you hear people go against the UN, I want to go, hey, the UN protects these important places, even against war. So when wars happen, do you remember the Taliban taking down important places, to people, important ancestral beings, places, roots, and all of that? Well, the UNESCO World Heritage Site tries to level this importance of places for reasons, not just tourism, but tourism, sustainable tourism, good places. So I wanted to close the show, if you don't mind, with a UNESCO World Heritage Site that many of you, that all of us on the show may have been to, and for our audience to think to, have you been to a world biosphere? Have you been to those kinds of places? Even a national park around the country, that's even really part of it too. Our national park system was started in the United States, believe it or not. So it traveled around the world. So when we see things being brought down, it's so important to look at the history of them, like our national forests. Our UNESCO World Heritage Sites are places that bring in culture. In the United States, we have a thing called heritage areas, which is not just the National Park Service saying this is a heritage area that could actually take in a region. Let's put in like Detroit has a heritage area because of the making of cars. Arizona has a heritage area because of the history of the Spaniards and the Mexicans coming in, but the Mexicans were there first. But anyway, there's a whole history there. But it's about cultures coming together, but it's not just through the National Park Service. It's about the community connecting. So this is very much like we're talking about with these communities, and it runs completely in alignment with these sustainable development goals through the United Nations. So UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Let's think about these because as we have wars, as we have climate change, these places are actually threatened. So I just want to see from each of you a heritage site that you've experienced that you think is important. So Carla, I'm going to go to you because you're our first guest on our show. So you get to be in the hot seat.
Right. All right. There are two that I would highlight, and you know what? In my travels, I definitely love, visiting the heritage sites. Either through just the historical connection or the environmental importance. And so, Saint Kitts and Nevis, we do have a heritage site, Brimstone Hill, which is this fort built 500 years ago, and just you know significant history to the island. If you want to know about St. Kitts and Nevis, Brimstone Hill, it was, amazing architecture built by slaves used during the that era of, the colonial era with constant battles, but it's still there, still very much intact. And you walk in there and you can feel history. Now, the other one that I'd mentioned is the nature reserve in Praslin in the Seychelles. When I went there, I could not believe what I was seeing. It is the most beautiful place that you could experience. And there are animals, there are species, biodiversity that is found nowhere else. And I know there are different countries around the world that have these, but that one in Seychelles really, had an impact on me. And so those two I would definitely mention as, definitely worth a visit, worth seeing.
And we have to watch these sites, right? That's the
Yes, definitely.
importance. And it
Most
is
definitely.
it is not just climate change, it is war too, right? So when we talk about the United Nations, a part of that is the sustainable goals, but it's also war and what's happening in regards to everything about is that community having enough water or support for these historic sites, which is part of the pillar of a community at times, right? Or an entire community. Like, what?
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. Joelle, I'm going to you, girl.
Yeah. So with this recent trip, we hit about 160 now UNESCO
Wow.
sites. So there's all, it's
We're probably
interesting.
missing some still, but
We probably are too. But one that struck me that I think I wasn't even expected to be so blown away with was Göreme National Park and the rock sites in Cappadocia, Turkey. That was one of the most remarkable cultural landscapes. And the cave churches, the Christian history of there that I didn't know that was so important at that time, and how they had to hide and to practice their faith. How that they were hunted, even underground cities and the communities that adapted to this incredible, unique environment over centuries. I could have spent weeks there. I just think something about that landscape, that beauty just struck me. But these people adapting to their environment, living in that environment while still, surviving, not, difficult circumstances. It was really impressive. And you really see a strong effort to protect that history, protect that environment, which involves both protecting it from natural effects, rain and so forth over the years, and then protecting it and making sure it's still there from a tourism perspective so it's not over-visited and so forth. I just found that was one of the ones that just really impressed me. And it's just the history and the cultural landscape tying all together was remarkable. That's been I have had lots of favorites, but that's one of the ones that come first to the surface for me when I think about UNESCO sites that sort of blew me away.
Good point on over-visitation. Our
Yep.
national parks are going through that, and then when they take away reservation systems, it's just a mess. And it's for the environment. And when you can take shuttle services, that's always a good thing to help within the parks and these kind of places. So great point on that. Ryan?
Well, that's hard to. There's so many. It's hard to just that list that we've done so far. But I'm gonna cheat a little bit and say Bruges, Belgium. 'Cause it's like that being a city, one of the only places that entire city is that location or a UNESCO site. But it's so cool because they strive to make, when you go there, it's just like this little world, and it has just a different feel. And then when you get into all the individual pieces of it, there's the gate, the fortified gates around the canals of the city, and then there's the architecture, and then the food. Like I said, that one square has Baroque and New Baroque, Gothic, Neo Gothic, Renaissance, all these just centuries of different architecture in just one square. You can just do a 360 and see centuries of different styles and art and everything. And it's so important to save that, because it's like stepping back in time. It's going in a whole new different world. But when it comes to places that have, the different UNESCOs that people don't think about, like I think Italy has like prosciutto is like protected now or something, because it's so like a specific, very cultural thing that they've done. And now it's like, or it's at least now it's like protected under them, where like no one, how like you can't make champagne unless it's made in Champagne. Like they have prosciutto. It's like can't be called prosciutto if it's made in there, and they protect it because a lot of times it's history. It's a way of life, and you're talking
It's an
about war,
identity.
and you're
Yeah.
talking about like the war stuff. I think just pretty within the last few months, wasn't recently, either it was in Lebanon. I know something like a Crusader castle or something just got destroyed in Lebanon, which is aggravating to me, to say the least. But it was either that place, or there was a place in, I want to say, I think it was in
Ukraine. Ukraine
Ukraine.
also.
Yes, there you
Yeah.
go. Thank you. Ukraine just got a certain castle or
UNESCO.
church UNESCO site was just destroyed by accident, I'm sure. But that's all I'll say. But it really aggravates, because these wonderful places that once the dust settles, it's not gonna. Yeah, the war may be over, but I can't go there and see that. Now it's just a pile of, and that those pieces of art are gone. That piece of history is gone. So they really do need to be protected, because no matter how many laws, unfortunately, there's going to be people out there that don't care or are going to do their own thing, especially when it comes to war. So that's when the international community has to come together even stronger to take a stand against that kind of destruction. So we can hopefully prevent those tragedies.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I'm going to go to Tucson, Arizona, right there by the Mexican border. And also as part of the Tohono O'odham, there's just all these tribes surrounding. And at the same time, Mexico and the Spaniards that came through. Tucson was declared the UNESCO Creative City of Gastronomy. And it was such an honor when it happened because it was the first one. And when you go to Tucson, there's places to go and there's certain foods like the Sonoran hot dog you can have. But it's just really about celebrating the culture and the agriculture. And you can go south of there, you can go to the Presidios. There's a barrio district. You go down to Tumacacari, which is a mission uh, just south, south of Tubac. And Tubac has a Presidio, which is one of our most important forts and Presidios in the country and part of the Louisiana Purchase. And when you go to that area, you'll find farming that has been going on for centuries, and that's also a national heritage area out there. But you'll find how, the indigenous people made their food, and it is just a wonderful city with a wonderful blend of people that get along and celebrate each other's food. So there's just certain restaurants to go to. So I know we talk about these historic monuments, but this is where the people come through. And there are the monuments all throughout this area to go and visit. There's places you can go and worship. There's missions like San Xavier del Bac, which is one of the most preserved missions of Spanish architecture in the world, etc. So there's so much. But I love all these different examples of these places because these heritage sites are about preserving people and the places. There's world biospheres that are also under this, which is about celebrating nature. If you think about southern Arizona, go down the road and in Ajo, a little teeny town that was taken over by mining. But right there on the border is the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, which is the only place you'll find those plants in this country. You go over the border, then you'll find them there in Mexico. But this is it. It's about world connections. And I think that's the importance of this show. And everything we're talking about is about connecting in community. Tucson, Arizona is connected to Mexico. That borderline doesn't really exist to most people in a way when you live there. Mexico brought in more money than the Super Bowl here, the big game.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So in Tucson, Arizona, Mexicans would come over the border and shop every year, all the time, brings more money than Super Bowl does. So when we look at closing borders around the world versus opening connectivity and community, we're also closing commerce. So I just want to close with that, but I want to see a close from each of you. So I'm going to go to you, Carlisle, as a guest.
For having me. Yes. This
Thank you.
has always been amazing. Yeah.
Is there something you want everyone to know, take away from this conversation? I'm going no borders. Like, I mean, that's not realistic, but like altruistic. Can we, have a softened
Yeah.
belly on
Mm.
that?
Well, with a soft underbelly, even though it's a work of fiction, I don't stray very far from the idea of community, of sustainability. I think whatever I write, those themes are always going to be with me. And so, speaking about close knit societies and cuisine, enjoying cuisine. And we've spoken a bit about, the amazing food in Tucson and around the world that we've all enjoyed. Cuisine is a great source of culture and it's also a great source of connectivity. And of course, learning about different people's history. So those are some of the core thoughts in the soft underbelly. But those are also core thoughts in Rose Veggies and in Island Journeys. And I think, these are themes that I live by, and will always promote. We need to focus more on what we have in common than what we have differences, because the differences are really, cosmetic. And so Yeah, so I'll end on that. We have to find ways to be closer and work together.
Oh, I like that. It's true. The differences are cosmetic. And sometimes we just have to back up and look at ourselves and go, why are you being like that? It's true. It's true. Ryan, any closing comments?
I mean, it's hard to say, but everyone needs to figure out a way to open their minds and open their lives to the world. And one of the biggest ways is travel. I know a lot of people can't do that, but you can at least do it in your own communities, like in the US. I mean, you go from city to city, state to state, there's so much out there, and there's these big communities, and especially like if it's out there, you're going to find it here, any kind of cuisine, culture, other something. So if you want to look, but it really expands your idea of what the world is. Like it's not, you're not just this, little bubble. Everything you do and everything everyone else does, it affects everybody. And when it comes to these goals and other stuff that we're talking about, it's start teaching your kids now, like learn about travel, learn about these places, culture, history, and one day maybe they will be better than you are now, and you leave the world, supposed to leave the world better than when you got it. And knowledge does that, and that brings people together. Knowledge brings people together. And then we start to understand these things, and we can help better each other and save these places that we've been talking about.
Love it. It's true. Joelle? Mm,
I think of the message here, and I'm going to keep my response here short. Every one of us has a seat at this table. There's 4 of us here today, and thank you, Carlisle, so much for joining us on our inaugural episode. It's been an absolute joy to get to know you and hear your perspective on so many incredibly important things. But we are all at this table. We can all work together to create a better future. It's not just about the 4 of us. It's about anyone who's willing to sit at this table and make a difference. And making a difference doesn't mean you have to be part of the UN. It could be just, as Ryan just said, being just, kind to your neighbor, be part of the community, visit the town next door, or it could be traveling the world. We all can make a difference, and every little piece helps.
I'll make
Agree.
you a killer cup of tea.
There you go.
Thank you, everyone. We'll have Carlisle back on again to talk about the soft underbelly. And also, Joelle and Ryan are on Big Blend Radio every second Monday. So thank you so much for joining us. And go to bigblendmediahouse.com for everything. And of course, go to wondrouscompass.com. Carlisle, any specific places people should go other than Amazon for your books?
It's mainly online. So
Okay.
Amazon, Watermarks, so all of the online sellers.
Thank you, everybody. Woo,
Thank
we got a
you.
new show. Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. Thank you for being part of our new show, Carlisle. Thank you both, Joelle
Pleasure.
and Ryan.
Thank
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 you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.